Yeah, Cara, we've been for the last half an hour, we've been, just kind of talking about why some of us are here and why it's important to us clinically and personally and what's maybe going on in our lives right now. And so it's been a nice little half an hour, but I want to make sure that we start on time. And so if you're okay with it, I'll just introduce you and we can get started.
Sounds good.
Okay, good. All right. So, Cara DeLaRosa is a certified pet loss grief coach and certified animal hospice professional. Her expertise includes educating pet parents on navigating advanced age and diagnoses and offering guidance and support through both natural death and veterinary assisted euthanasia. Cara is a member of the Pet Loss Professionals Alliance and the International Association of Animal Hospice and Palliative Care. She lives in Santa Rosa, California, and serves grieving pet parents across the U.S., offering one-to-one grief coaching sessions and a 7-month self-paced pet loss grief course and an ongoing pet loss support group. Yeah, which I can attest to. Um, I, as I told everybody who was here, I'm in Kara's pet loss grief group right now and doing her 7-month self-paced pet loss course. And I cannot speak more highly of it. I think it's a great resource and support. So thank you for coming, Kara. Thank you
Oh
for
my
spending your
goodness.
time with us. Take it
Thank
away.
you. Thank you. Okay. So some of what you just heard, I'm going to repeat again because it will give you a little bit more context as I go into my background and how I got to do this work. This is quite a niche of a niche is what I say of this work that I'm doing. So tonight we will be discussing the nuances of pet loss related grief and the specialized support that clients require related to their loss. I'm going to be presenting this information in several segments, starting with my introduction and background, why pet loss grief is different, how it affects the body, working specifically with guilt, why this particular grief hits so hard, and the support that clients require. I will be referencing my notes. I don't have a fancy slide presentation. It'll just be me talking. And so you will see me looking at that. But I will also ask at certain points for a little bit of engagement. And so if the chat is enabled, I would love to welcome you to respond during those moments. So I love that there's such a turnout this evening. Again, thank you for being here. And it really tells me that there's such an interest in this topic, and it's such an important topic. I did a quick search last night on the statistics, and they're saying that in 2024, there are 89 million households in the US that have at least one companion animal. So that's at least 89 million animals in the US. And a lot of folks have more than one companion animal, right? That's a lot of animals. So I'm curious if any of you would be willing to put into the chat how many animals you have. Just write a number like 1, 25, 10, 2. Lots of twos, 3. Nice. 80 plus. Oh my goodness. I'd love to hear. That must be a farm or a rescue. Both physically attached to me at the moment. Amazing. Yeah, so we love our animals.
We love our animals.
Just plants. Yes, we love.
Beauty.
I have one senior kitty right now. I had 5 kitties, and she's the very last one now. And she loves being the only one. Okay, so my point in just mentioning that is that thinking about all of these households, millions of households in the US at some point are going to be dealing with pet loss. And this is a population, you know, people are going to be grieving and people are going to need support. And my hope is that more folks will be called to serve in this area on behalf of the animals and on behalf of the grieving pet parents. So I'm going to explain some key points about my background, and you will see how my life experiences, along with my education and training, have culminated to where I'm at today. I was born into an interesting and important death care lineage. My godmother was the well-known psychiatrist Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and she was the marriage officiant for my parents' wedding. And my middle name, Cara Elizabeth, was given in honor of her. She was a pioneer in near-death studies, a founder of the early human hospice movement, an author of several books, and she created the widely used but also misinterpreted 5 stages of death. And I say misinterpreted because her theory of the 5 stages, which you might often hear it referred to as the 5 stages of grief, was actually meant to be in relation to the stages that the dying person goes through. It was not initially meant for the 5 stages that any griever who's lost someone goes through. And so because she was the first person to create a model and talk about grief, it kind of became the overarching cultural interpretation of what to expect during the grieving process. But that was not her initial intention. And so as we have found, other models have come forward, and it's not so linear. The grieving process is not linear at all. It's like a wild ride, crazy pretzel all over the place with different emotions. And so my mother was a student and a colleague of hers. And my mother was also a pioneer in the early human hospice movement and founded the first nationwide summer camp model for children with HIV and AIDS. And so what that meant for me growing up was that from the age of 2 into early adulthood, 2 to 21, I had a very early introduction to significant loss, as I spent my summers at the summer camp program befriending peers and staff members that were living with HIV and AIDS. And as you can imagine, many of them died. I also grew up on a 14-acre hobby farm where my introduction to life and death was extremely blunt, as it can be working with animals in a farm setting. And the animals were truly my best friends, as the farm was too far away for my school friends to come visit. I spent a lot of my time with the animals, communicating with them, playing with them, and there was a lot of loss there as well. And every animal loss was painful, but none of these losses compared to my adult experience of losing my heart dog, Rosemary. And Rosemary was, I found this also with clients, and I've heard this from people, is that sometimes as we move into adulthood, this animal the first animal that we adopt or the first animal that we raise plays a significant role in our life. And that can be very difficult. It was Rosemary's loss that, in my own grief journey after Rosemary's loss, that led me into this work where I've now been supporting pet parents and their animals professionally for over a decade. I started as a veterinary assistant for a single doctor integrative practice that blended Western allopathic medicine, traditional Chinese medicine, and alternative modalities. And many of this clinic's patients were terminal. And so supporting the pet parents came naturally to me in this role as I was helping them navigate difficult diagnoses and manage medication protocols. As a certified animal hospice professional, my scope covers the point from where a diagnosis is given and the pet parent needs a deeper understanding of what to look for as their animal advances or continues to age, to creating custom quality of life assessments, which are essentially maps on how to navigate the entire end of life process, to the palliative care phase, which we often don't talk about this word palliative. It's essentially the comfort care phase pre-hospice before we get to truly end of life hospice care. And so I cover the end of life hospice care as well. And then into helping the pet parents plan for the euthanasia and plan for their goals for what the final moments will be when that day comes. And I also help to co-facilitate the euthanasia appointment, which I like to refer to as a graduation party. I'm medically knowledgeable, and while I cannot diagnose, prescribe, or perform euthanasia, I can educate, notice shifts with the animal, prepare pet parents for what to look for, and guide them on how to receive appropriate support from their veterinary team. I have also assisted families by request through the natural death process. That means without euthanasia, when it is a diagnosis that is appropriate for that, and not all diagnoses are. Pain management is critical with these cases, and I guide the pet parents through every stage of the active dying process, which, as you can imagine, supporting the pet parent through that is especially delicate. We don't often see death close up like that. Even in our, human hospice movement, there's a lot of medications on board, and there's a lot of bodily things that happen that can be shocking for us to witness. So that's a special process. As a certified pet loss grief coach, I am trained to support the tender hearts of pet parents across the United States. I do work remotely and in person, and I guide them on how to learn to soothe their dysregulated nervous systems, create healthy coping mechanisms as a basis for self-care after loss, and work with various models and modalities to integrate the loss. My work is holistic and action-based and transformative. When we're in such a state of fragility and dysregulation after loss, we long for the understanding of what is happening to us, what is going on. We long for support from others and something to do, an action that we can take that will bring some ease and perhaps create a bit of a buffer from what can feel like an impending depression. I believe that everyone grieves differently, but the folks that find me are a very special group of people who are sensitive, spiritual, and are so connected to their animal that this loss is particularly devastating. And as I mentioned, I came to this work after experiencing this with my own heart animal. And my goal is that by providing tools and a multidisciplinary resources to the folks that resonate with me, their grief journey will move a bit faster and easier than my own did. So next, I'm going to move into why pet loss is different from other losses. And if any of you are willing to share, I would love to know if any of you have personally experienced a pet loss. And you can just put yes in the chat if you have, or no in the chat if you have not. Mm. Oh, heart dog. Yeah. Oh, sorry, 1 month ago. Yes, yes, yes. Oh, last week. Last weekend. I'm so sorry. Oof. Yes. Okay. So many of us have. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing. I know that even sharing that can feel vulnerable and sensitive and tender, and especially sharing it in a group. But it seems that we're all in a group that understand, and we're all here because we care, because we've felt it. Okay. So let's get into it. Pet loss is nuanced. It's considered a disenfranchised grief, which means that the loss tends not to be accepted by the majority of society. Or generally, pet loss is seen as a lesser than loss, which creates a state of isolation for the griever. Society typically gives folks that have lost their animal, a few weeks to recover, maybe a few months. But when the grief lingers and people aren't just over it, there tends to be a sense of judgment that can come forward from people who just don't understand. And that sense of judgment further isolates the griever, causes more pain, more grief. And honestly, you never forget it. People will say things, often the wrong things, and those statements really stick with you. And they may even permanently affect that relationship. I personally experienced it, but I've also had clients say, that people will say things like, oh, they were just a dog, like, can't just get a new one, and animals, in my opinion, and maybe yours as well, are not replaceable. They are individuals with souls that are spiritual beings. They're little teachers, and we can't just replace them. So those statements are particularly painful. I've met folks who feel embarrassed, taken aback, or even ashamed of their grief, or just confused by it. They don't understand why this loss is hitting them so hard. I've had people say things to me like, I never cry. I didn't even cry when insert, a human family member here died, and I'm a mess. What is going on with me? Some people will choose to bury themselves in work or distractions and stay busy so they don't have to feel the impact of the loss. And some will go out and get an immediate replacement pet and seemingly move on. Not everyone deals with pet loss the same way, and not everyone is affected by pet loss the same way. So I'm referencing tonight the clients that, and my own experience and the clients that I work with. I believe that unprocessed grief stays with us. And as we are discovering more and more, the body keeps the score. Unprocessed emotions can cause illness within our bodies and cause long-term suffering. I am of the opinion that leaning into the grief, feeling it in order to heal it, and mourning in order to mend with support and guidance is not only the most productive way to work with the loss, but the healthiest in terms of a body, mind, spirit approach. Within pet loss itself, there are many categories of loss. There's anticipatory loss leading up to the eventual death, traumatic loss, unexpected loss, which I put into the traumatic category, ambiguous loss, which is when our loved one suddenly goes missing with no resolution. A lot of folks experience this with natural disasters. We had wildfires in my area. Cumulative loss, where the most recent loss brings up past losses. And grief has a tendency to bring up every other grief we have ever experienced in our life as well, which gives us the opportunity to revisit those old wounds. Some pet losses are the last link to a loved one that has passed on, which also amplifies the loss and the grief experience. So some of these categories, like the last one I mentioned, are more prone to stuckness around guilt, as are ambiguous loss and tragic loss or traumatic loss. Regardless of the specific type of loss, I have come to recognize that every loss I mentioned affects our bodies the same way, with an especially heightened experience during traumatic loss. Many of my clients shared the same symptoms, and I started to put together a pattern. They came to me and said, I'm having trouble eating, either too much or too little, having trouble sleeping, too much or too little, experiencing nausea, sometimes diarrhea, and usually that comes with the nausea and diarrhea can come with traumatic loss, migraines, anxiety, irritability, brain fog, forgetfulness, being accident prone, more clumsy, reliving the traumatic event, having recurring memories or dreams related to the event, staying away from places, events, or objects that are reminders of the loss, having exaggerated feelings of blame towards oneself or others, and more symptoms than that. And you might, if you're in the mental health field, see where I'm going with this. All of these symptoms are listed on the NIH website definition of PTSD. These are all symptoms of our nervous system in a heightened state. There are very practical ways to calm our nervous system and support our body's need to get us back into a parasympathetic mode, where we can then be in a place to receive and actually absorb emotional support. At the time of putting this together, I could find zero research or any other resources about this. I felt like I had made a discovery. And now, and thankfully, we are being flooded with information around the nervous system, soothing the vagus nerve, and somatic healing modalities. And I'm thrilled because these resources are exactly what the newly grieving need. As I mentioned, I feel that a holistic approach is best able to address the body, mind, emotions, and spirit of the grieving pet parent. And after tending to each of these aspects of self, we are then able to start to heal and integrate the loss. Pet loss seems unique in that regardless of how or when the loss took place, there is one very special, I'm calling it a symptom, that tends to stick around, and that needs extra attention, and that is guilt. Over and over again, I see the most amazing pet parents, the ones who've gone above and beyond for their animals, grappling with guilt. The critical mind can get very loud with the I should haves, I could haves, I wish I would have, if only I could have, or would have done something different. And it does not seem to matter if everything played out perfectly and peacefully. Guilt still plays a role. Because guilt makes such a common appearance, I have found ways to coach clients around working with it. I actually believe, and I look at guilt as a cognitive distortion. And I start by introducing some CBT and DBT practices as well as integrating the differences between thoughts, feelings, and emotions. We practice sitting with big feelings, and I introduce self-compassion exercises, and we work together to create new belief patterns, which in time will eventually create new neural pathways. We discuss what early conditioning around shame and guilt patterns look like for this individual in their history, and help them start to investigate the root of these cycling critical statements. We develop a plan for working with the critical mind and detaching from our thoughts, and instead observing and investigating them, then countering the thought with truths and reaffirming those truths. I have found Tara Brach's RAIN process, recognize, allow, investigate, nurture, to be helpful with this. And when all of the above doesn't feel like enough, I bring in shadow work practices that may offer insight and eventually relief. One of the reasons that I believe that guilt plays such a large and prolonged role in pet loss is due to the fact that our animals cannot talk. People spend a lot of time wondering how to help their animal, wondering if they are in pain, and sometimes are not aware of the signs of silent pain and discomfort. Medical decisions are that much more difficult when the patient cannot communicate in the same language. When I build a custom quality of life evaluation for my clients, we look at the animal as an individual and explore their subtle, unique communication signs, which helps the pet parents feel much more clear about responding to their animal's needs. In the case of euthanasia, which is the most difficult decision that any human being ever has to make for another living being, pet parents are largely making decisions based on what others are recommending between their veterinary team, their family, and their friends. Often their own inner guidance is not clear because when our hearts are so involved, it feels nearly impossible to be objective. I've witnessed clients feel regret over a decision made too soon or too prolonged. There is no perfect answer to finding the exactly perfect time. But when it's possible, I like to allow the animal to lead the decision. And I believe that they do give us the subtle signs if we know what to look for and if we are truly looking. When it falls into alignment with the human's belief system, I recommend animal communication services so they can hear directly from the animal about their embodied sensations, how medications are making them feel, if they want to opt in for invasive treatments or what medical treatments do they want to opt in for. if they feel ready to transition, and if they have any end of life wishes or bucket list items that they would like to have honored. In my experience, when the pet parent is able to approach the end of life journey from all possible angles, and this is not always possible in every instance, but when we go at it as mindfully as possible, the guilt is greatly diminished after loss. My goal is always to provide resources to pet parents so they can make the most informed, mindful decisions for their senior and ailing animals in order to lessen the impact of the eventual grief. And when a client reports to me, I have no guilt, that is a huge win. And I'm happy to say I have had that happen. So next we will move into the specifics of why pet loss has such an impact for particular clients. And I just want to check in. How is all of this landing with everyone so far? I know it's a lot, it can be a lot to take in. Does anyone have anything they'd like me to repeat? And if you're ready for me to move on, I can just give me a thumbs up. So either way, like let me know. Do you have any, was there thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up? Cool. All right, great. Okay, so this is a good time. Thanks for all the thumbs up. I love it. This is a good time for me to mention that not every single human who loses a pet needs specialized support. They all need compassion. And some, like my clients, and maybe the clients that are seeking you out for support, do need specialized support. And so now we're going to talk about what I have seen in my work and the various reasons. So many times the animal was considered the primary support system, the being they leaned on, the being that followed them through life's challenging chapters. Some clients have experienced horrendous traumas, and their animal was their protector or their only support. This was the being that was unwavering in their life, completely non-judgmental, always present, and never shared a secret. There are so many situations where this is the case. So I will just give you 2 examples for consideration. And then I did see some questions come in. So Erica, if you would, you guys will track those for me. And then at the end, we can do the Q&A. Cool. Okay, so moving on to a couple examples here. Imagine a family dynamic within an estranged marriage or partnership that's deeply lacking in communication and positive interactions between partners. The partners may feel unheard or isolated within this partnership. And this is an extremely painful situation for the humans. When there is an animal present, that animal may become the emotional support. An empathetic ear who is attuned to the emotions of the human and reflects the love and positivity that is lacking from their primary partnership. Moving on to a different example, think of all of the isolation that so many of us went through during the pandemic. Humans are social animals, and being isolated from others with limited communication and touch took a mental health toll on many. Folks who lived completely alone had a much more difficult time coping, while folks who lived alone but with their animals had a bit of an easier time. And I often think about the medical studies that they've done where, humans we rely on human touch and affection for co-regulation. And so if you have an animal, it actually helps you get back into a regulated state with your nervous system. Petting your animal helps to decrease, blood pressure. There's so many benefits to having the animal. For many people, this special animal allowed them to be fully seen or heard, and possibly for the first time in their life. Human to human relationships can be challenging, while human to animal relationships can feel safer, more reliable, and create trust. I consider the influence of early childhood attachment bonds here as well. I recently came across a post by psychotherapist Alan Robarge called "What Happens When Your Pet is Your Primary Attachment Figure?" He seems to primarily focus on attachment theory related therapy. And this was thrilling for me to come across because I have not seen anyone else talking about this important facet of pet loss. In this post, he states, if you have unresolved, unintegrated attachment wounds from childhood and other adult relationships, then the loss of a beloved animal can activate not only the immediate grief, but also the stored, residual, and unhealed grief from years past. He goes on to explain how this compounds our grief, and we begin to grieve a lifetime of attachment wounds and broken bonds from previous abandonment, betrayal, and rejection. Losing that attachment bond can feel like death, our own death. There is a purity to the human animal bond, with the expression of unconditional love continuously being mirrored back and forth. And in a sense, the human being begins to love themselves in new ways because the animal is consistently mirroring how lovable they are right back to them. Our brains have mirror neurons. And I recently learned the origin story of mirror neurons. And so if you don't know this, I would just love to share this with you. Much is still being researched in this area of neuroscience, but essentially, mirror neurons were discovered by happy accident in the 90s in a laboratory where a group of scientists were studying. They were recording electrical signals from a group of neurons in a monkey's brain related to motor function. The monkey was allowed to reach for pieces of food, and then as it reached for pieces of food, the brain would light up in response to certain movements. Well, the lab tech took a lunch break where the monkey could still see the lab tech and what he was doing. And when the lab tech went to eat, the mirror neurons in the monkey's brain lit up just as if the monkey was eating. The monkey was just watching, right? So that was how they were discovered. And I think about how our companion animals are quite literally mirroring back to us the love that we feel to them. And the quote, that quote, be the person that your dog thinks you are, or be the person that your cat or your companion animal thinks that you are, comes to mind. The animal helps the human forge a sense of self. For some folks, the desire to care for and tend to another living being creates a sense of purpose in their lives. And it may also fulfill a biological desire. Companion animals perpetually need caregiving, right? They are the animals, the children that never grow up. They always need to be fed and cared for and tended to. And when that loss happens, these folks feel like they've lost their purpose. And part of their grief journey involves seeking to create new meaning for themselves in their lives. I also believe there is a fundamental biological DNA component to the human animal bond studied by anthrozoologists. That is the study of the human animal bond. There are a myriad of neurochemical and hormonal bodily responses to the bonds we share with our animals. And when they suddenly stop, it can feel like withdrawal. Imagine getting oxytocin and dopamine hits every day for years. then when the loss happens, there's an abrupt halt to all of the feel-good chemicals your body was producing, along with the onset of grief. Sometimes losing an animal leads people to feel like they want to go too. And it makes sense. I have heard pet losses described as feeling like losing a companion, a best friend, a child, a soulmate, and partner. I've heard people tell me more times than I can count that this loss hurts more than when they lost a human in their lives, a husband, a partner, a parent, a sibling. So many grievers need help understanding why their loss feels as horrible as it does. And the answer is their animal was not just an animal. Their animal was their everything. So now moving into a little bit more about offering support to clients, I want to talk about the importance of mourning. And first, I would like to ask you all, does anyone in here know the difference between grieving and mourning? Yes, Heather.
I don't think I count because I think the only reason why I know is because I think I learned it from you. So
Okay. Is there anyone else who knows? Most people don't. Okay, so we kind of lump it together, right? Like we don't know that the actual specific difference between grieving and mourning. So grieving is the internalized experience. It's what the individual is feeling internally. It's what feels so isolating. And mourning is the externalized expression of that grief. So, mourning is the action that we take in our grieving process. And mourning is what actually helps us to heal. So, with mourning, mourning and ritual are intricately linked. Ritual is a series of actions, words that we can put together and we can create meaning. So ritual is why we have funerals, masses, memorial services, burials. It's an opportunity for people to come together and collectively mourn, to share an expression of the grieving process in community, to be seen and to be heard. And this is what is so lacking with pet loss, and also what makes it such an isolating experience for the griever. So going back to talking about the different models of grief that have come up and been developed, I like to work with the model of continuing bonds, because continuing bonds brings in these elements of mourning and ritual. Continuing bonds model of grief is essentially continuing to deepen the bond or the relationship with that being. We're finding new ways to integrate that being into our lives, even though they're not in our present form anymore. So creating ways to continue to talk to them, to light candles in their honor, to continue to forge a relationship with them in a new way. It ties mourning and ritual together, and it helps people to heal and integrate the loss, to get to the point where the loss is part of the fabric of their being, where they have been able to grow around the loss and carry it with them throughout their life. An example that I'd like to give here is someone maybe who has lost a dog, and maybe they did the same walk on the same dog path every day. And so an example of how to integrate continuing bonds would be to call in their animal and say, we're still going to go for that walk, and carry that, take that leash and take that collar and put it in your pocket and go on that walk, and imagine as if they are walking there with you, that they are there with you. You can imagine that you are seeing them smell the smells they would have enjoyed, and really calling them into that experience. It's so important to validate the depth of the grief experience and let pet parents know how normal this truly is. I like to remind them that there is no timeline, that we expand around the grief and it just takes time. So it's normal to have a grieving process that lasts years, because this loss is exceptional and it's just as potent as a human loss. I allow pet parents to be exactly where they are in the grief process and allow them to lead. And most importantly, I offer reminders of self-care and the coping mechanisms we are developing together, which help them build the resilience needed to continue the journey. And that's all I have for you this evening, and I would love to hear questions.
Thank you so much, Cara. That was really rich. So I don't know if you want me to just read your question or if you want to ask it. I'll give you a beat to pop in if you prefer to ask Cara yourself.
Oh, sure. I could ask. You mentioned something about facilitating communication with the pet for their final wishes and kind of bucket list items and stuff like that to help with grief. I was curious how you would do that.
Yes. So I have different animal communicators that I refer folks to, and these animal communicators this is all that they do. It's really a finely honed skill. And so if the client is open to that, not everyone is, right? Some people are not open to psychic work and they feel very skeptical. But the folks that I refer people to, this is their life's work. And so they are able to actually, speak to specific things so the pet parent really knows, like, okay, they have really connected with my animal. They really do know what is going on here. And at one point I was working with an animal communicator trying to create an end of life package, which was really great because we could actually ask the animal, how does this medication make you feel? Or do you want to opt in for subcutaneous fluids? And the animal could say yes or no, and so we could actually base the treatment care plan and the hospice care plan around the animal's needs, which is great.
Okay, thank
Yeah.
you. I appreciate that.
Sure.
And I'll just quickly say that we did that in our case with Cara, and it was really helpful. And I found it really invaluable for the palliative care and hospice planning. Hey, John, do you want to ask your question next? Or you have to unmute.
Oh,
So I understand that there are some people that can't afford to pay for a communicator, but they want their animal to give them a sign. I'm dealing with a client right now with their own issues, but one of them they brought up was the wife's pet that she had, that's old dog, and so if they can't afford to hire a pet communicator, what recommendations would you have to work with their pet themselves to know, like, are you ready for me to have you euthanized? They've
yes.
talked to their vet, and the vet's fine to do whatever they want. It's a
Sure.
great vet. I go to the same vet, but they were asking like guidance.
Sure. Okay, so I've got 2 points that I like to recommend to pet parents. First of all, no one knows your baby the way that you know your baby, period. So trust your intuition. Get into a grounded place. Your animal has been communicating with you through the entire relationship. Trust that, number one. Number two, have the conversation with the animal out loud. Say, look, I really need you to give me a sign, and it needs to be a sign that I will not miss. It needs to be so clear. What is the third thing I tell people? It's going to come back around to me. There are special communication signs that every individual animal has with their pet parent, and it can be as subtle as the way in which they lean into your hand when you pet them, right? So when I do my quality of life evaluations, we look at, and I'll give you the categories really fast so you guys can use this for your clients. Favorite things. What are the animal's favorite things to do? Right? We build a profile on the animal as an individual. The special communication signs. What are the special things that they do to communicate with you? We look at those things because when those things are no longer there, they can be signs, right? What are the hard lines? What are the pet parents' hard lines? And hard lines are when these things happen, it's the line in the sand. That's not okay with me. And every family has a different version of this. But number one is, can we keep the pain managed? Right? So if the client's in a situation where they can't afford the medications or they can't keep the pain managed, then it would be an appropriate time to consider euthanasia.
Yeah, thank you. That's actually, I did that with a cat. I asked the cat to give me a sign, and when it stopped purring and just laid there limply, it was like, okay, that's my sign.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The other piece that I wanted to bring in that I had forgotten was, oh no, it's slipping again. It'll come back. It'll come back.
You can
Yeah.
add it when
Oh,
it comes
okay.
back around in your mind.
I'll write it down.
Vicky, do you want to ask your question about supporting family members?
Yeah, we have had some loss recently, and I just want to know, so it's kind of a twofold question. What is the best way to support family members when they have lost an animal or had to make a decision, end of life care for an animal that held a lot of, it was a very special relationship, but also held some really unique connection in my daughter's life. And then, how can we further train in this work? Because it is such a hugely needed field. And we do run into this with our clients or, those of us who operate in the world with a lot of animals, it's a service we could deliver. So it's kind of a twofold thing.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So I remembered, John, I just wanted to add this last final piece, and this is beneficial to everyone. The other thing that I like to tell pet parents is that it's important in this conversation that they're having with their animal to give the animal permission to leave. A lot of times our animals are holding on for us. They will hold on for us, and they hold on because they're worried. Will mom or will dad be okay when I go? And so telling the client to genuinely be able to work on, it's a practice, getting to the point of being able to say authentically, I give you permission to leave. I will be okay. You don't have to worry about me. And we actually see this with human death as well, with human hospice, is that when we give the person, we say, I'm going to be okay. We will take it from here. The person can just transition. And the animals do the same thing. So that's really an important piece to add in. Okay, so around supporting family members with through a loss. My first thing to say is it's always important to validate how profound and deep their experience is. To give them time to process it, just to allow them to feel the way they feel. Often just being seen and witnessed in the grief is what's needed. So not trying to change the experience. Actually, what can be really beneficial too is, a lot of us don't know how to handle it. It can feel uncomfortable. Like, if I mention them, if I say their name, is that going to be a bad thing? Is it going to be a bad thing to talk about this topic that is so sensitive? And what people are longing for is to be seen. And so often sharing stories, talking about, oh, I remember when this animal did this thing. Do you remember that too? Approaching it as if in the similar way that we do with human loss. It feels comforting to know that your animal had an impact on other family members. So there are things that you can do, like even have a family celebration of life where each family member shares a story. And this is actually bringing in mourning practices together in community and allowing the griever to be seen. So what's coming to mind is like around the holidays, bringing in the losses that we've experienced into the family setting and sharing a toast in honor of them, speaking their name in honor of them. The name carries so much weight. And allowing the person to share the stories and talk about their animal, even if they're repeating the same stories over and over again. But really often what some of the most potent medicine can be going for a walk with that person, sitting in the park with that person, getting them out into nature, getting their feet on the ground, just being there with them and allowing them to be in the grieving process. And I don't know if you had any like specifics of like what she's going through or specifics that I'd be happy to offer more to that question.
It's really coming up on 8 o'clock and we still have a couple of questions. So Vicki, if you want, I can connect you with Cara if you want to ask a more detailed question. But Allison,
I'm happy to, if anyone has additional questions and we don't have time, I'm happy to email you guys. I'm happy to answer those questions if you want to reach out to me.
Yeah, actually that's, let's see. Cami asked if you could share the resources about pet communication with the group.
Sure.
So that would be something to add in an email follow-up. And what resources would you recommend veterinarians have available to clients dealing with the loss of a pet from Allison?
Let's see here. For the veterinarians, and thank you for the veterinarians and the vet students that were here this evening. There's a fantastic resource for you called the International Association of Animal Hospice and Palliative Care. They have all sorts of resources on how to talk to pet parents, literature that can be, printed out and handed out to pet parents. And then there's a list of resources I could actually put together also and like email out.
That's a great idea. And that could include Joanna's question is how to join the support group and any books to recommend
Oh my gosh,
to
so
support
many,
clients she
so
works
many books. Yes.
and there's a lot of questions about resources and for kids
Okay.
dealing with the pet death.
Oh,
And
I have
is this
so
okay
many.
for you? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, it'll take me, if you guys would give me like a day or so, like, you know, to compile it all. But I mean, I have a whole library in my house of all of these books and resources. And if anyone is interested in, there is an animal hospice and palliative care advocacy certification that you can take where they talk about a lot of this stuff.
Wow. That would be great to have a link to that website too, because I think that fits Vicky's question about further training.
Okay. And then there's a lot of pet loss support group resources. My personal pet loss support group is private only for clients who have worked with me and had maybe 4 sessions with me, or who have joined my pet loss course and work with me, and then I open it up to them. So
Awesome. So we should close, even though I feel like honestly, like you've given so much and it's so rich, and yet it's the tip of the iceberg, really, I think. So thank you, Cara. This was really, really valuable. And I think, judging from the comments, people got a lot out of this. And we just really appreciate you sharing your experience and knowledge and your work.
oh my gosh, well, it was just an honor to see all of you here, and thank you for coming and for joining me in this conversation. As you can imagine, this, you know, I'm doing this work on my own, and there's no one in my area who does this work, and it's thrilling to be connected with other folks that have an interest in it, and to be able to talk about it and share some of my findings. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. So I will be in touch with the recording, and yeah,
Great.
we'll catch up.
Okay,
Thank you,
and everyone,
everybody.
yeah, I will get you those resources. Just give me a little bit of time.